welcome to Axios and welcome to Qualcomm House. We so appreciate your being here for an amazing conversation about AI policies as a catalyst for innovation and growth. I'm Mike Allen, a co-founder of Axios. Before we plunge in, I wanted to quickly thank Qualcomm, who's been such a great host here, the incredible Axios events team, and the journalists of Axios, who every single day have put on fascinating programs. Very excited about today. You can always tell when the conversation is to be great when around the coffee, like people are already plunging into the debate. So we had a great preview, which we really appreciate. Two great guests today. Cristiano Amon is the president and CEO of Qualcomm. He started as an engineer, led the semiconductor business. He's very passionate about putting technology in the hands of consumers. And as part of that, he's led the diversification and expansion of the business. And at the end of our events, we always have one fun fact. Cristiano has a very fun fact. And another longtime friend of Axios that we're honored to have here, Eva Maydell, is a member of parliament from Bulgaria, lives in Brussels. This is her third in a row time on the Axios stage at the World Economic Forum. So in America, the Triple Crown, we'd say. She's vice chair of delegation for relations with the US and is someone who's been a tech leader, both as a thought leader and actually getting things done in the European Parliament. Not easy to do. Welcome to Axios. Cristiano, thank you for coming. Eva? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. We so appreciate it. We had a great pregame conversation out here. And a big theme today is going to be openness. And Cristiano, I'm going to start with you. Generative AI is meaning new user interfaces. You talk about AI on the edge. That could be my car, that could be my home. Blow my mind. Tell me what's happening in that space.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Happy to be here. Thanks for the folks that are watching online. There are many things we're talking about AI right now. There are many different applications on AI, and there's one that doesn't get a lot of attention, but is very, very powerful. And I'll be brief, but I need to tell a little bit of a story. So, especially for Qualcomm, the chips that we do is where the people are. Like, think about the data centers getting bigger. It goes where the energy is. But the chips that we do on the edge, this is where the people are in using this technology, with their phones or PC and cars. So when you think about the personal computer, there has been the human relationship with the computer. When they started, like the first PC, when IBM and Microsoft and Intel did the first PC, we had an ASC II keyboard, and those that remember MS-DOS, probably it's a sign of showing the age, know how we as a human had to train to use the keyboard and the OS to communicate with the computer. Then the mouse happened, and all of that, the computer changed. The computer changed, the screen changed, the OS changed. Actually, Windows, the name comes from windows that we could open and we see, and how we interact with the computer changed. And it became easier, but we still had to learn how to operate that. Then one day, I think and some of the things that Qualcomm have done, the personal computer could fit in the palm of your hand. You can carry around with you. Now you have to interact with a smaller screen, but then there's the touch, which is also a little more intuitive, and we learn easier to operate. We learn how to operate. But now we have something very interesting and it's very powerful. Because of Gen AI, for the first time, our relationship with the computer is going to change. The computer now can communicate with us like we communicate with each other. We don't have to learn. The computer can see things how like we see and understand it, can hear, and can talk. That is the massive change. That is one of the biggest change you can see in all the personal devices or devices that we interact with. And that's going to change again. It's going to change how computer is built. It's going to change OS. It's going to change applications. So we're going to start all over. And I want to connect this with this conversation about openness because, especially since we're here in Europe, and I think the European Union, if Eva's going to agree with me, it's a combination of countries, each and every one with their different cultures and their different languages and all that. So then it poses an interesting question, which is different cultures, we're gonna expect the computer to just interact with the humans with the same culture, or will the computer change that culture? And we're just gonna go interact the way the computer wants us to interact. So it's fascinating, and I think the reason this is fascinating because from a technology standpoint, it's gonna be incredible amount of innovation because it's gonna change everything. Applications are gonna change, software is gonna change, but at the same time, it creates this discussion about how important will be to have open platforms and the ability to actually adapt the platforms actually to the need of each market in society. So, and I know I talk a lot. I'll talk about edge later, but this is a fascinating area for me.
But one quick thing on that, you talk a lot about the importance of humans, whether humans or culture. Like, what drives the AI? Could you just tell me your thinking about that?
Look,
Who's ultimately in charge?
well, I think a way to describe this, and I want to maybe answer your question going back to um, how computers work. So let's think about mobile today, right? In mobile, you have two systems. You have an Apple system, or you have the Android system that is the same system used worldwide, and you have applications that build on top of that system, and they sit on an app store, and you go to the application. With AI, things are going to change. The application is not going to be the same. Um, the agent, the AI agent, is going to try to do two things. It's going to ask you, what do you want to do it? And I'll do it for you. Or it's going to try to predict your every movement. Think about between you and the computer and those things that we used to do and or still do today to go make the computer work for us. You go to one app, you go to another app, the agent's going to do that for you, and it's going to be interacting. And maybe the best way to answer that question is to provide examples. Like I often in talks I provide this example because everybody understand it. Like if you have a bank account, you have a banking app. You go there and you see your balance, you see your statements, you pay bills. You can just tell the agent, pay this bill for me. Or how much do I have in a bank account? Can I buy this? And say, yes, you do. Do you want me to buy it for you? So those are going to be different type of interactions.
Great. Perfect. So we're very lucky. We have two of the leading minds in the world, most on-demand minds in the world on these topics. And Eva Maydell, like you've done something very difficult. You've actually gotten something done in European Parliament, and something that you are passionate
That's a
about.
good way to put what people do in parliament. Because we're more than 700. So perhaps it's right that some get things done and others not.
No, but you are definitely a doer, and something that you're passionate about is getting politicians and regulators to talk with business. And you were explaining to me how they're very often out of sync, that very often the government is looking back while the private enterprise is racing ahead. Like, tell me about that.
So initially, when you hear that, people might say, yeah, but they interact all the time. So first of all, I don't think this is necessarily true in Europe. Second of all, I don't think it's true when it comes to tech leaders and policy leaders in particular. Perhaps it has to do that, well, I wouldn't say that's a new type of sector necessarily, but for some it's difficult to comprehend and to understand because it moves so fast at a speed that we can't understand. Most politicians come from traditional backgrounds, whether they've been farmers and then they decided to represent their community in the European Parliament, or they've been part of a medical hospital or any sort of related to the medical sector, and they come and they join the health committee in the European Parliament, for example, or in their national parliaments. So kind of they feel like we have this background and this experience, and we are comfortable engaging on these topics. And somehow there has been very few people with a technical background or engineering background, even though you have those, of course. We had previous commissioners or ministers, but somehow overall, institutions seem to understand less the technological developments compared to, I mean, let's look at the biggest challenges in front of Europe today. One of them is, of course, geopolitical, and it's related to the war in Ukraine. Most politicians think we all understand geopolitics because politics is about foreign affairs, it's about getting deals done, negotiating, and to a certain extent that's true for the past. But today, this relationship has become much more complex. If you look at tariffs, one would say, well, we always had to do trade, and we know that it's difficult, but we'll figure it out. But when it comes to the relationship with tech companies, Europeans always thought, well, we don't like that, so we're going to fix it with legislation. And I've been one of those people trying to explain that I think it's way more complex and that legislation would not necessarily fix the inability of Europe to innovate. Legislation can support Europe to innovate, but the legislation that we've passed is not necessarily the one that's going to support breakthroughs in Europe happening. And I think this mindset would take a while to change, and it might not change because I've worked on these topics for 10 years. And going back to your question, in the very beginning of this 10 years, people thought, oh yeah, that's something interesting. She's talking, we read some headlines, but let's focus on the business of today. So my colleagues never really wanted to pay enough attention apart from thinking we need to fix something. They never really thought, let's sit down all together and try to understand where tech is going to drive our society in 5 years, in 10 years, or longer. But if today European leaders do not have an honest and open conversation about, on one hand, the societal risks that technology poses, but on the other hand, about the opportunities and how we steer those together, I think the relationship would continue to be very difficult, and probably from a policy perspective would always be focused on the past rather than on the future. So I think we need new types of formats. I know CEOs like Cristiano would meet leaders, but usually is a table book for two. So you would have 15, 20, maybe 30, maybe a bit more minutes. You'd meet, it would be a good meeting, constructive meeting, and then we'll move on to the next meeting, and politicians would move on to the next thing. And I kind of feel there's the lack of a type of a council gathering where you can have a couple of representatives from academia, the tech leaders, and policy leaders to kind of pose questions, societal questions that could help us strike perhaps a new social contract between us. So I don't know if it sounds too unclear, because it's even difficult for me to understand exactly, could it even produce an outcome? And the ultimate outcome would be for us to start trusting one another more. I think that's almost impossible, probably, to get there. I mean, wishful thinking from my side. I'm a tech optimist, but also a realist. I would say probably yes, but at least to listen to one another and to try to understand each other's points of view. We clash more rather than we try to understand one another, and I think it will be essential because. We won't be able to govern otherwise as elected representatives or as institutions.
Now, we're very lucky we have on this stage both sides of that table for two. So, Cristiano, I ask you, what is it like to do that 20, 30, 45-minute meeting? How much progress do you feel you make? And would you like a different forum?
Look, with Eva, it's super easy. We really work well with each other. I really like working with her. But I think the reality is, maybe I'll say a little bit the perspective of our company. I think we have, since the beginning, I think, of our company, we always have the view, which sometimes not shared by all companies, but we view that we're all going to be better off if everybody innovates. And so we always build open platforms. We'll always license our technology broadly. And I always brought, discussions about, how this technology can benefit other industries that need to come in and participate. And 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 to some extent, I think we have over the years developed a relationship which is very fact-based about what the technology can do, at least within our own expertise, and always being very proactive, working with the public sector about not only the things that are going to be important for this technology to develop, but what are the elements that are going to be important to maintain competition. And I think within that, we feel very comfortable having those conversations. And I want to basically tie this with AI. Every time you have a big technology transition, you do have it's and you end up having a situation that you have winners, you have losers, and it's difficult to predict the future. It's incredibly difficult for a regulator to come regulate after this happened. It's really important to do it in the beginning. So we try to be an active contributor by saying this technology is going to change all those different industry, and this is where this is going to go. So in actually you can kind of set, okay, this is the rules how we're going to get there, and then yes, let innovation happen, let companies succeed and other companies not so much, but at least you have an understanding of what it takes to get that to happen. And the reason this is important, especially at this time, because AI is going to change. I give an example. How it's going to change computers, it's going to change platforms, it's going to change what are going to be the partnerships. And and when we think about AI in general, I do make a tie between AI and semiconductors, which is we saw, and I know I'm going to bring a different topic, but I promise I'll connect it too. We saw that during the semiconductor supply chain crisis, that no chips, things were not being produced anywhere, right? And
Yeah,
then
no cars. Yeah.
and people realize that resilient supply chain of semiconductor, it was has a connection with economic security, and because you needed, the world that we live in is becoming more and more digital. Everything needs semiconductors. Well, use the same thought process for AI. Every company, one way or the other, in order to stay relevant, is going to have to adopt some of those technologies and innovate on the technology with their knowledge of their market they operate, with their knowledge of the area of expertise that they operate. And if you don't create an environment that all those companies can innovate, you just have the transfer of wealth going from entire industry to another one. And I think that's why I agree with Eva. It's important to have those conversations, even if they're painful sometimes. It's important to, because at the end of the day, from our perspective, we're going to accomplish the objective of the technology if every industry, every company can adopt it and innovate with that technology.
What do you learn from your conversations with the public sector?
Well, I feel I'm going to do again the the parallel with semiconductors. Semiconductors is very complicated. Supply chain is very complicated. So the most important thing in those conversations is to reduce the gap in knowledge. So I think um, what I learned is it's incredibly important to spend time uh, educating and providing the facts, so then you can reduce the knowledge gap, and then you can have a constructive conversation. And we did that with semis. I think we're doing that with AI, because only when you have that ability, then going back to what Eva said, then you can have that council with all of the
Right.
stakeholders that can actually have a discussions about what are the outcomes that we want.
Right.
It's a really important point, the one that Cristiano made. Um, so often the conversations also among policymakers, they lack depth and they lack understanding. If you lack the basic understanding of what this technology means, of how powerful it is, it's very difficult to drive the right decision from a policymaker. And I often find myself in this policy discussions, and very often they circulate about the role of platforms rather than actually the more important parts of the supply chain, of how you even get to the point of seeing what you're seeing on your computer or your device. And so you understand that in the 15 or 20 minutes you have with 30 or 40 policymakers around the table, it's very difficult to make that, gain that knowledge or provide that knowledge to drive the right decisions. So often decisions can be rushed, are related, as I said, to headlines, and I have seen it in the past years. It drives us to taking wrong decisions often, or maybe wrong is too strong of a word and of an expression, but it's yeah it the reason why I have difficulties expressing myself is because I'm very passionate about the topic, and
Mhm.
it pains me a lot that it's difficult to help those conversation become more constructive, more fact-based, to drive us to take the right decision. It's I'm worried of how those conversations will look like in the next couple of months, and they might be, they might be just like, okay, the U.S. is investing hugely, so let's do the same. Let's put 50 billion on the table, 100 billion on the table, because obviously Europe can put way less than the US for various reasons, but without thinking, what do you actually want to achieve? So we have conversations, but we never ask the bigger question. The conversations are related to all the buzz that is out there.
Mhm.
Who said what decision was taken? And we kind of never sit. And I know that doesn't sound very optimistic, but I have to say it because I'm part of those policymakers and political class in Europe. And I see us failing answering the big question: where does Europe want to lead? How do we want to do that? Why is it important for us? I don't think we can replicate what the US is doing or what the UAE is doing. We probably definitely don't want to do what China is doing in terms of social scoring. And we've banned that practice under the AI Act. We have different strengths. Some of them are related to our culture, as Cristiano mentioned earlier. Some of them are related to our traditional industry. So for me, it's not about trying to replicate what someone else is doing, but having a very sober European conversation about how are we going to drive growth in Europe. And a lot of my colleagues believe we have to drive growth in Europe the same way we've been doing it in the past, using the same tools and the same instruments and methods, also the same way of taking decisions. And I think it's really about time. It's a make it or break it moment for Europe, for us to say, okay, let's sit around the table and say, what is the single most important thing for Europe right now? In terms of security and defense, we know what it is, but when it comes to growth and economic growth, we need to kind of put three main priorities and act immediate on them. But without having a broader conversation, we seem to be running behind the train and trying to catch it and say, like, okay, that's what we're going to do. I think we need our own European discussion, because we can only go ahead if we take all the complexities that Europe has of 27 member states, the history, the culture, the different way of operating and doing business. And perhaps one of the important things for businesses, and it goes in a way through regulation, it's removing all the many barriers the single market has. I mean, Europe is only on the map as the place to do business because we have a single market. If we have 27 markets, it would look very, very different. So that market has to be enabled. That market has to be, I don't like to say digital, but it has to also be that, because it seems like we still talk about the single market, the single digital market, and I'm like, it has to be the same thing at this point. But people still think it's two different things, because there's still so many obstacles to business.
That's all super fascinating. What is the path to having the single market and the single digital market be one market?
I mean, I think the path is for a different way of doing doing politics today. I think if you've done that for 20 or 25 years, you have a lot of experience, but sometimes you tend to do things the same way while expecting different results. And we know that Einstein said that that's the definition of madness. So we're at the point where we need to produce results, and we cannot just put the discussion on economic growth only related to let's scrap all legislation because everything we did in the past 5 years is bad, and that's going to help the business. I think this is overly simplistic. I think is also not necessarily going to help companies grow. I think we need a way more targeted conversation on things such as how do we make our industries apply AI. We never have that conversation in Europe. Those businesses are often, they don't trust new technologies because they're so focused on what they do that they're like, why do we need to put something new in our systems or in our machines to grow? Like, we're fine. Like, we're happy with what we have. We're quite humble in Europe to a certain extent. We don't necessarily like big ideas and announcing greatness because we have a different attitude. And that's okay. And I admire that. And I love Europe. And I'm a passionate European. But we still need to understand that that's going to get us up to a certain
Mhm.
point. So we don't have that conversation. We don't have the conversation of how to link the innovative ideas to that traditional business. Usually, there are good startup companies. Most of them fail to scale. The few that scale usually go elsewhere. I don't say that's a problem, but it would be great if some of them are connected within the European market. We do not ever talk how to better organize investments and capital in Europe. We still, that market is entirely fragmented, and we just say we have to fix it, but we never do, and it's 10 years or more that we talk about it. I just think that you would need political leadership. It sounds like a cliche, but right now it's more important, and politicians that understand the technological advancements, they don't need to be engineers necessarily. I am no engineer, but I understand that if Europe continues underinvesting and undermining the importance of the tech sector for European growth and prosperity, to put it most generally, yeah, we're going to lose out of the race.
Cristiano, let's cross the Atlantic. Your Qualcomm is based in San Diego, in my native state of California. I grew up the Pacific Coast Highway in Orange County. What's the biggest thing that the United States government could do to encourage AI innovation?
So the, I think there is, maybe I'll try to connect this with some of the conversations and the points that Eva made. Um, there, there is, in general, I think, in the United States, an understanding of the importance of innovation economy and the importance of enable companies with new ideas to innovate. And I think there's this broad understanding now. You hear that in the press. You hear that from politicians that AI is a very disruptive technology. It's probably once in a generation change, and it's going to change every single industry. I cannot. It's going to be difficult for me to list an industry that will not had some form of benefit of AI. And I think there's this broad understanding in the United States that, and maybe more in certain industry than others. In our industry, uh, the blessing and the curse of the tech industry is if you're successful today, it does not guarantee you're successful tomorrow. So you have to continue to innovating, and I think there's a broader understanding within the United States about that, and I think companies are curious and eager to basically see how AI is going to change their business, and that goes from drug discovery in pharma, goes to the healthcare. Like I had seen inbound interest for industries that traditionally would not be partners of Qualcomm, especially as we say we're going to do AI at the edge, we're going to do AI industrial. To say, how can how can that change my business? And I agree. Adding to your question, I agree what Eva mentioned. I think if you look at Europe, Europe has great industries, and different countries have different expertise, which is already being tested on the European single market, right? So, for example, you have some countries with great auto industry, you have some countries with great industrial industries, you have some countries with great food industries, pharma, and I think maybe there's something that it's happening in the United States, and it will be helpful in Europe to have this broad understanding that AI it's going to be transformative and it's going to be important for innovation and competition. And then it leads to this conversation. I think the U.S. is moving towards having clear rules for those companies to innovate, and I think that's an opportunity for Europe as well. And on that, I want to connect to the topic of this panel, which is those those rules shouldn't be prescriptive. It shouldn't be prescriptive about what you're going to do, but they should be clear about the importance of having platforms being open, platforms being competitive, and platforms be safe. Because at the end of the day, uh, different industries are going to move at different speeds. You have to accept that. Our industry probably is going to move faster than healthcare. It's going to be faster than industrial. But if you don't have the ability for those companies when they get there to apply AI, you lose an industry. That's why I think all of those things are very important. So, which is innovation is important. I think the ability to have freedom for those industries to innovate, but also the importance of having open and free competition. And I think that's well understood in the United States. If you don't have competition, then it will stifle innovation at the end of the day. If you defeat the purpose in first time.
And Eva, you mentioned earlier that you're a well-known techno optimist. You've mentioned that you're also a techno realist. One of the great things about the World Economic Forum is it sets the table for the year ahead. What's the optimist side of your brain telling you about 2025, and what's the realist side of your brain telling you?
I'll start with the realist that it's not going to be easy, but it's possible. That would be the optimistic part of me. It's going to be possible to convene some of those conversations I talked in the very beginning. And that's probably something that makes me excited. I would like to try and convene one of those conversations in the year to come and in the next couple of weeks and months, because I think the earlier we try to have that forward looking conversation among the different and most important stakeholders
Mhm.
that can have that vision for how do we strike that next social contract with our citizens will be very important. So yeah, I'm charged, and this week leaves me charged because of the urgency that's out there, particularly for Europe, to take some decisions and to make sure they're the ones that are, yeah, not the methods of the past, as I said. And I think the test will already
Say that phrase again. It's
methods of the past.
right.
And I think that's important, and we'll test that already next week when the competitiveness compass will be presented by the European Commission. I think it would be important to see whether that's a compass and a document that's goal oriented, that says we want to reach this, and we have a plan, and we're going to do it in this way. But we're not going to prioritize everything in the first 200 or 300 days. We know that for competitiveness, there's few underlying things we need to fix: high energy prices, or not a very well organized capital markets. There's a lot of thinkers in the commission. I hope they figure it out, and in member states. But I want to see a very different type of document that shows that we are ready, that we want to be committed, and that we want to execute. If we just say, well, that's the roadmap, and in 5 years, we hope to go through all those files, I don't think that's going to be the right message to send. But it also will not show the urgency that the institutions have to act with.
And what about the optimist side?
The optimist is that I can convene that council gathering
Mm.
of tech and policy leaders. That I can convene it. I'm probably more optimistic rather than the part on would it be meaningful and would it actually be different than the bilaterals of a table book for two rather than a table book for 15, for
Right.
example. So this is
Where,
where I'm cautious.
where would you physically like to have this roundtable?
We initiated this thoughtful process last year with Will Marshall from Planet, who you probably know. And we kind of announced it at a Munich Security Conference. So we plan to try and convene that in a couple of weeks at Munich.
Cristiano, we're talking about what the US government can do, and there's a lot of conversation in the United States about infrastructure investment. But something very interesting about Qualcomm, you're going for efficiency, and you're looking, are there ways to take the loads off data centers and the cloud? Tell us about that.
Yes. It's interesting. We started a conversation maybe a number of years ago. We started to talk about AI at the edge, and people didn't understand what we're talking about. And because,
And can you just pause and and just give a definition of AI at the edge?
yes, it's, by the way, thank you for asking this question because it's interesting. Uh, uh, Different people understand different things.
Good.
Sometimes we're talking to a cloud company, they believe the edge means an on-prem server. No, the so I think the best way to describe it is probably what I said before. I think the edge is where the humans are. It's where you know everything that we interact with, or the things that exist in a factory floor in a warehouse. So the edge is your phone, is your PC, is your car, is your home broadband, is your Internet of Things, consumer electronics,
Mhm.
is what happens on industrial, is everything that is not in the data center. Are the connected computers that is not in the data center? That's the edge, and
So it's like with the end user.
yes, and the interesting thing is what I said before: computers are changing because of AI, but
Mhm.
computers. What actually gave scale to computers was the edge, and people spend time talking about, oh, is this going to be in the cloud or in the edge? And that's the wrong way to think about it.
Mhm.
It's going to happen in both, and they're going to happen different. They're going to be very different. They're going to evolve or different. The best example I can give it to you is, I'm sure you have a smartphone with you. I think all of us have one. That is the most cloud connected device in the world. And at the same time, if you look over generations, the amount of computation we do in those devices continue to increase exponentially. And I think that's what's happening with the edge. So what is happening with the edge is the edge can run AI. When we think about AI, we go to the data center, we train a model, and the model gets trained with all this data. But there's a reason you're training. The reason you're training is that once it's trained, you can use it. And when you start using, that becomes inference. That's when you use it to do different tasks. Uh, those computers at the edge can run those models, and they're incredibly efficient from a cost standpoint, from a power consumption standpoint. You don't need a nuclear power plant to power your smartphone, as an example. They're very efficient, but they also bring other things. That's how the edge evolves. It has the ability for you to have an instant response latency. For example, if you have AI as part of the control function of your car, and you're talking to your car, you're asking car to do things, the car's telling you about things, you plan your navigation, you need to make sure that happens right away. You get a response right away. You need the fast response. You need to run on that computer. You have to be reliable, whether you have a reliable connectivity or not. That's also true for a robot in a production. So you're going to have a lot of applications happening at the edge, but also you have other elements like privacy. For example, with things I spoke about, the computer now understand the human language, and I think the computer is going to be your agent. The computer is going to do things for you. So the computer is going to know where you are. It's going to know your calendar. You know all the things that you're doing. Know what you want to do. It's going to the credentials to your bank account. The computer is going to You're going to ask the computer, do this for me, right? And maybe you want all of that information about you to be private, and then therefore you want that entire model that is going to be your assistant, that is going to get better. as it knows more about you, to be
Mhm.
running on the computer that you have with you. So the edge is already at an accelerated development of AI, and you can run models. And look, I can talk about this all day. I'm going to give you some other examples. Like we have some interesting applications that we've been working with companies. I'll give an industrial example. Um, you have an operator. You have to. You have to leave. I'll be very quick. You have an operator of a factory. You train that model on everything about your factory, and that it's in this handheld device. It run there and teach him how to do different tasks.
Eva, we're going to give you a last word
I have
here.
to be in 6 minutes of the conference.
Okay.
Is there an
Thank-
AI at the edge? How you can get data?
Uh,
No, I would love to answer that question. I'll be late. It's my pleasure to be here. So please,
um,
that's not right. I just saw it's like 6 minutes. Is
We could- no, we-
mandatory prep briefing by the WEF team.
That sounds serious. Last question. You mentioned next week from the European Commission, we're going to be seeing the competitiveness compass. Did you name it? What do you think of the name?
I think we need to start putting less time on complicated names and more time on simplifying our solutions for growth for Europe. I think that could be a very easy strategy, but probably very challenging to execute. And don't get me wrong, I mentioned I'm a passionate European. I think this is a great project that over the years has made sure that we live in a peaceful, protected society, and a society that was able to grow. And we had some incredible political decisions: Schengen, Eurozone, the single market that I've mentioned, programs like Erasmus that have benefited the beauty of Europe. And right now, I think it's time for the next big European idea. And I very much hope it will be in the area of competitiveness, in the area of how to support our industry to reinvent itself and to be fit for the age of the edge.
The age of the edge. That's the perfect drop the mic moment. Eva Maydell, Member of Parliament. Thank you. Don't get us in trouble. Cristiano and I are going to close things down here. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for a great conversation. Thank you for your passion. We're just close out real quick here. You mentioned agents. Can we talk about that for a second? And your colleague Nate Tippett, who's a longtime friend of Axios, was using a great expression that in the old days of the Palm Pilot, that we kind of worked for our device. In the agent age, how is our device going to work for us?
Yes, I think you start hearing the buzzword about agentic AI and agent, but I think that's how the applications of the future are going to be. And maybe I'll oversimplify, but we're going to be thinking about applications as very specific actions, and because it all goes back to the conversation about how you're going to interact with the computer. Now you're going to interact with the computer like we interact with each other, right? So what's going to happen, what the agent is going to do is, let's say that you open your phone. I go back to a phone example, and you select the app, you touch, you open the app, then you go to the menu, and you take the function that you do, and you get one information from one app and go to the other app. And it's easy for you to understand. For example, let's say you and I are talking, and we agree that we're going to meet for dinner. So we're going to go calendar, we're going to go find restaurant, then you're going to go do reservation, you're going to do all those different things. Well, with the agent, we're just going to, you and I will be talking. As we're talking, we talk about agreeing for dinner, the agent's going to say, you're available this date, and is it a good date? And then I'll say, yes, it's a good date. And then it's going to say, book the calendar, send the calendar invite. Will ask me the question, is this the restaurant you want? I said, yes, I'll make a reservation for you. And we move on. And you can easily see on this example how this whole concept of multiple applications and how we interact with those applications is going to change. And you can see how this is going to be an application of the future. Agents are going to replace many apps, going to replace OSs. Sometimes, for example, you feel you have the boundaries, right? You have the boundaries of an application can do. Let's see, again, stay with the phone example because everybody has one, it's easy to understand. There's a particular app, you have to go to an app store to get it, you download it, and the app has a particular function. But once you get to an agent, the agent is not restricted by those boundaries of OS and App Store. The agent is free to go to the web and do anything. So you can start with an agent that was for one function. You can go into search, you can do into shopping, you can do into healthcare. So it's going to fundamentally change how we interact with computers, and that's why you hear those terms about agentic AI, and that's going to redefine applications.
As we say goodbye, a last question. We always finish with one fun thing. You're a car guy, Cristiano.
I don't know.
Tell us what you drive to work today, and what's one thing that AI will do to change the driving experience.
Okay. My answer is going to be incompatible with the thing that AI is going to do to change the drive experience. So, so I drive to work every day at F-150 truck. I'm
Aggressive.
a truck person, but I have cars that are completely incompatible with what I do for a living. Like Qualcomm has been now working with virtually every OEM. We're transforming car into connecting computers, but I like cars from the 60s and the 70s. They have no electronics on it, and that's what I sometimes drive.
Classic, old school. Thank you to the World Economic Forum. Thank you to Qualcomm for Qualcomm House, the amazing Axios events team, and Cristiano Amon, CEO of Qualcomm. Thanks for a great conversation.
Thank you. Happy
Thank
to be
you.
here. Thank you.